So thank y'all for having me. Today, I'm going to be honest with y'all, I am so tired, not just because of the beautiful event that is daylight savings time, but because it's been a wild week for trans people. It's been wild months for trans people. It's been wild years for trans people, and things are consistently sort of ramping up. And so I've been dealing with a lot of community support in my off time. Yeah, and so that's definitely kept me up at night. And so I'm going to be doing a few things with us today. And so it counts as a sermon because I'm saying it's a sermon. But what we're going to do is I'm going to share some poems with y'all today. And we're going to go into something I want to read for y'all that's not a poem, but I think very necessary for what's sort of happening right now in our time, and something that I'm seeing that's very concerning. So this first poem I'm going to read for y'all today, it's a call and response. There's a bit of call and response in it, and you can respond to it in two ways, because it's going to be very obvious what I want you to do, okay? You're not going to wonder, what does he want you to say, or what does he want me to do? It's going to be very obvious. You can either, when it's time for the call and response part, which is at the very beginning, you can either say it out loud audibly to yourself, you can say it off mute if you would like to, or you can type it into the chat, okay? So those are the three ways. You can sign it if you would like to. So those are the 3 and 4 ways that you can do it. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay, right. And so this poem, before I even get into this poem, I want to say that this poem for me invokes the spirit of Victoria. Victoria was a Black trans femme person out of the land that is called now Benin in the 1500s. In the 1500s, Victoria was stolen from that land of Benin, stolen, taken into the land of Belgium, where she consistently refused the clothing of her enslavers. And the people that were around her, the other enslaved Africans that were around her in her community, referred to her as one of the Jimbanda people. Jimbanda people being folks who were gender nonconforming, who still exist in spiritual space, existing in East and West Africa, and are people that are said to hold the medicines of their communities, that are told to be able to have spiritual gifts and powers, and some of which practice sacred sex work and all these other different ways in which they heal the body, right? And so Victoria is someone who, even in a time in which she was experiencing the end of the world, still knew herself as a trans and gender nonconforming person, as an African person. And so I want to share this poem, which for me highlights how I feel about being at that intersection of Blackness and transness. So when I say story time, y'all say story time, story time, story time, story time. When I say true story, y'all say true story, true story. So the other day, I dreamt I was cuddling with a human-sized platypus. I stroked its beak and its tail. I wrapped my arms around it, and it made a sound I did not recognize. But that sound felt a lot like joy and calm and loyalty. I hear that's what some people call love. And maybe I didn't know what love sounded like until that moment, but that's not surprising to me, because survivors were like that. We're used to mistaking chaos for love. We've been trained to call our very realities things that they are not. So this clarity in my spirit was new. I woke up all rejuvenated and wanted to know everything about the love of my dreams. So I read every encyclopedia entry, every Wikipedia article, listened to every TED Talk I could find about the platypus, but they all described it the same way. Said that it was weird and strange, that it had the bill of a duck and the tail of a beaver. But how strange does that sound to the platypus? That you could be saying it has the tail of a creature it's never even shared the same continent with. It's like if it has the bill of a platypus and the tail of a platypus and poison spurs in its feet like a platypus, it's probably not a duck. It's like calling it a thing it is not. It's like when colonizers that called themselves scientists landed on what was once a Black continent we now call Australia. You know, when they first saw the platypus, they thought it was a joke, that someone was playing a trick. They thought someone actually wasted their day gluing bills onto the faces of rats, so they tried to remove the bill from the face of the platypus, and actually ended up killing a lot of platypuses that way, trying to uncover the joke. Turns out the joke was murder, because they were insistent on calling a thing it was not. It's like, maybe my gender is a platypus. You know, folks always insisted on labeling parts of my body things that they are not. It's sort of like when Columbus landed on Hispaniola, and Balboa landed in North America, and Hawkins landed in West Africa, and they saw all these Black and brown and indigenous bodies. They saw men and women, and they saw something else they thought was a joke. Someone playing a trick. They saw all these people that lay between their understandings of gender and sometimes somehow even beyond them. You know, some at the time called us healers. Some called us just purely divine. Now some of us just call it trans for short, but to them it was a joke. It was someone playing a trick. So maybe that's why. Maybe that's why they ordered us killed by dogs. Maybe that's why they burned us alive. Maybe that's why they tried to kill everyone that ever saw us as holy. Maybe that's the punchline, because the joke to white supremacy is always murder. It's like when they told us they were bringing us civility on Black and brown soil, but what they meant was that they were bringing us the transatlantic slave trade, because they like to call a thing it is not. It's like, maybe my name is a platypus. You know, because when I say it, people tell me that's not what it should be, when really my ancestors called for me and I responded back, and they told me there is nothing Blacker than calling my own name into existence. But to you, maybe it's a joke, and maybe that joke is suppression, because supremacy always tries to kill things it doesn't understand. You know, I hear abusers do that sometimes. Try to devalue things they don't understand and call things that they are not. So I may call that gaslighting. They may call it law and order. They may call it civility. They may call it a joke or a trick on them, a trick on their science, a trick on their biology, a trick on their power, a trick on their legal system, a trick on their supremacy, a trick on their superiority. But there will always be the platypus. Even when you laugh behind its back, even when you deny its power, its poison in every step it takes. Underwater, it senses electrical pulses to find its food and the things that it will prey on. It reminds me of myself and the ways that I sense bullshit and decide what kinds of energy I will or will not feed on. Even when you think I'm a joke, that my body is weird and strange, even when you call me a thing I am not. Maybe I'm not a platypus. Maybe I'm just defiant with venom in my walk. Maybe it's just my familiar. Maybe I'm just familiar with the ways white supremacy works. Maybe my familiar teaches me to always call a thing exactly what it is, and I call you. So thank y'all for doing that first poem with me in the world. Thank y'all so much for doing that first poem with me. Yeah, and so that's that piece for me, yeah, kind of woke me up out of my sleep one night. So I think that sometimes art, you know, makes you lose sleep, right? The next and last poem I'm going to read for y'all, as we're talking, I spoke about Victoria, who, you know, is one of my favorite ancestors, spirits to think about and meditate on, just because I think that she had such a power and continues to have such a power in this world and in the lives of trans people. I think that a lot of, especially when it comes to transness, there's this lie consistently. I saw someone on the news the other day, right? I saw someone on the news saying, oh, well, you know, trans people got to get used to being misgendered, and trans people got to get used to the ways that people are talking about them because, you know, it's new, right? And the reality is transness isn't new. And when we say that it's new, we divorce it from its roots in indigeneity. We erase the connection between transphobia and colonization. We erase the hundreds of years of Black, brown, indigenous, trans people that have been fighting for the right to exist for hundreds of years on this continent, continents all over the world, right? So thank you. This next piece I'm going to do for y'all, I know that most people here, or at least a good chunk of y'all, do not identify with Christianity. I come from a Christian and Muslim background in my family. And so this story for me, I think I find that for a lot of people, for those of us that, well, one, Christian supremacy in the US it just is, right? So it exists, it's all around us. A lot of what y'all are fighting when y'all go to and call your legislators, you're fighting Christian and white nationalism and supremacy. That's what y'all fighting, right? And I find that a lot of people, whether they were raised in households in which Christianity existed, or they're experiencing this country and in the world, this Christian supremacy, a lot of times we don't have positive things to replace the negative things that get told to us about us, right? Does that make sense to y'all? Especially for my trans and queer folks, and all the folks, my disabled folks, my folks who are broke folks, who get told different things from morals and morality that isn't for us, right? And so this poem is my favorite story in the Quran, my favorite story in the Bible. It's the story of Yusuf in the Quran. It's the story of Joseph of Genesis in the Bible. And if you don't read none of that, you're not interested in none of that, it's the story of Joseph and the Technicolor Dream Coat as told by Broadway. And I believe that even if you don't believe in the Bible and you don't believe in that, you believe in Broadway, okay? So let me know in the chat if you believe in Broadway, okay? Okay. And this is a true story. She asks if she can talk to me about Jesus at 3 a.m. on the C train, because something about my trans face means clearly I'm on a path straight to hell. I've come to expect this type of reaction from strangers at least once a week since the first time I was exercised at 16, but today I've grown tired. And I've decided it is my turn to proselytize. So before you do any of that, I want to know from you, have you heard the good word about Joseph of Genesis? See, Josephine, Joe of Genesis, favorite child of Jacob, aka Israel. When asked what you wanted, you desired one thing, a ketoneth pasim. Pastor called this a royal coat, and Joe, I had never read the Bible before. Found you and kept reading. Josephine, I got to 2 Samuel and realized your coat of many colors was a princess dress. Joseph, your father must have really loved you, because he got it for you and you wore it with pride. Joe, when your brothers saw you in your flowing dress, in your glory, they became enraged. I am sorry for the beating you received. Sorry they destroyed your dress and smeared it with the red paint of your swollen veins. Josephine, did you know they told your father you were dead? So he never come looking for you, never knew your brothers, sold you as a slave into Egypt, and once you were stolen from your home fields, the earth dried up. Joe, the very ground on which you walked, mourned the loss of its gender for a child, and all the plants died. And the animals no longer have the will to live. Josephine, your family nearly starved. Saw the formation of ribs where once there grew flesh and belly fat, and they, hungry and desperate, traveled into Egypt. And what must they have seen, Joe? Seen Egypt. People discovered you. Not as just gay, not as just trans, they saw you in totality. You went from slave to leader over lands. There you were, Josephine, as magnificent. And your family couldn't even recognize you through the glare of divinity, but you saw them shivering in fear, waiting to hear what this regal leader might say. Wondering if your spirit might see fit to grant them the grain needed to survive. And Joseph's love broke through the darkness of resentment. And for the first time, your family saw you, as magnificent. For it was your word that saved them from starvation, dear Joseph of Genesis, aka Josephine, aka Joe. I'm claiming your story for every trans kid told that we're unholy. I'm claiming your story for every queer told that in order to love, we must let our faith die. I'm gonna put it in a pocket over my heart, next to Ruth and Naomi, next to David and Jonathan, next to Hegai and Deborah, and seat them at the last Passover with Jesus and Lazarus. Yes, I'm taking Jesus with me too, dear pastor. To you, who claims your words are from God, whose book has been pledged to King James, know what allegiances you keep. We have been lying about my people for too long. Thank y'all. Thanks, y'all. Thank y'all for letting me share these poems with y'all today. Today felt like a poem day, especially as we get into, I feel like the beauty of poems is that you can explain a lot in 3 minutes or 4 minutes, right? There's so much that you can kind of do, and there's so much history that gets stolen from us, especially around transness. What I want to read for y'all next is it's a statement I had to make. It's a statement that myself and my colleagues had to make this week. Because I don't know, let me know in the comments if this has happened to y'all though. So what I expect, right? What I expect. So right now, this year, we've had over 400 anti-trans bills introduced in this country. Over 400. That's a 500% increase from the last few years. In 2019, just to give you all an example, we had only 25 anti-trans bills introduced. So 25 to over 400, and this is not even midway of the year, right? And so what has been clear is that there's been a there are people who go out of their way for cruelty, and they're testing something. They're trying to see how cruel people are because they don't know how to govern. So they can't prove to you that they can govern well, but what they can do is give you someone to fear, right? And so they're doing really good about giving people someone to fear, right? As I see, right? So I see in the chat, right? So Tracy says they won the abortion fight, right? All that stuff, right? It is not an accident that all these things are happening at the same time, right? But the disturbing thing for me is not that I've seen people who have already known themselves and proven themselves to be cruel that are acting in these ways. I'm seeing a lot of people who otherwise seem to be allies that are also putting out anti-trans rhetoric. We've seen whether it's, we've seen feminists like J.K. Rowling obviously say anti-trans things over the last few years. We've seen and she's not someone who's part of this country, but obviously can impact what happens here because of her reach. I'm thinking about even seeing someone who is a bisexual queer woman like Alice Walker the other day, who put out some anti-trans rhetoric. I'm thinking about, I saw a queer comedian the other day, a cisgender queer comedian, put out some anti-trans rhetoric yesterday. So this statement that I made is more about those people and the people that said that they were down for LGBTQ people, but have particularly strategically lost the history of trans people in this movement. And so an organization I run called the Black Trans Prayer Book, where we are we call ourselves a multi-faith and beyond faith organization. Myself and my colleague comes from a Lady Dame Figueroa Didi, who's my co-director, comes from a Lukumi African traditionalist religion. I, as I said, come from a Muslim and Christian background. We have colleagues who are Ifa, we have people who are Hoodoo, we have people who are Santeros, we have people who are Buddhist. So we have people who are atheists and agnostic. So we're just a broad ranging group. And so this is the statement we made concerning the current attacks on trans people in the United States. Listen, y'all, the devil has been busy this week. There's been for some time a dangerous framework emerging that has encouraged many people to misunderstand systems of power when it comes to trans and non-binary people. We have been witnessing people of varying political ideologies painting trans and non-binary people as dangerous and conflating trans and non-binary people, demanding to be treated with dignity and respect as being equal to the vitriol and violence that we receive. At this point, most of y'all already know that over 400 anti-trans bills have already been introduced in the US this year. We have seen so many on the right spend their days frothing at the mouth to use trans and non-binary people as pawns for their political gain. That is unfortunately unexpected and also is a part of a long history of conservatives attempting to demonize groups as means to hide for their own inadequacy in governing. Part of this conservative strategy includes recruiting other people from adjacent targeted communities to act on their behalf. Right now, we are seeing a massive uptick of cisgender women and LGBTQ folks working on behalf of the right to further demonize trans and non-binary people without considering the ways that transphobia harms Black cis women and LGBTQ folks on the daily. This is what it means to operate from a white supremacist framework. To be clear, transphobia does not stop at harming trans and non-binary people, and we repeat, this attempted eradication will not stop at trans and non-binary people either. Given the history of this country, it is impossible to separate racial justice from trans justice. The attempted eradication of trans people began the minute Europeans decided to colonize the globe. Our ancestors and many of our living elders and traditions understood the innate spiritual power and positionality of what we now call trans and non-binary people. For those of us that have not been tricked into imagining that transness and gender expansiveness is a new thing, we understand fundamentally that in many cultures, trans people were and are essential to the survival of these living traditions. It was part of the colonial project's attempt to destroy indigenous peoples across the world that made trans people some of the first targets of imperialism and white supremacist violence. It is no surprise that we find reproductive rights and trans rights under attack at the same time that there is an attempted erasure of Black and Indigenous histories alongside the lands that we tend to. To the broader community, if compelled to critique trans and non-binary people as some kind of difficult, dangerous, powerful, cisphobic hate group, ask yourself these questions. Can you point to a bank run by trans people? Perhaps a Fortune 500 company, a small country of some kind, perhaps, a major world religion. Is there an institution trans and non-binary people run that directly controls your income, housing, or access to basic needs? To make it all the way plain, trans people as a group lack institutional power, period. The people making life harder for cis LGBTQ folks, for Black people, for poor people, for trans people, are cis people that profit from cis heteropatriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy. If as a cis person, you find yourself being offered a platform to push back on trans people, trans leadership, non-binary people, ask yourself why and who does it serve? Trans people, you are deserving of love, dignity, respect, compassion, and a life free from gaslighting. Ashe. Okay. And I wanted to read that because I have a sense, as you all continue in your work, wherever you are on the spectrum of creating justice in this world, right? I know that some of you will be tempted to be recruited. I know that some of you, people will try to recruit on the behalf of those that are trying to destroy the most targeted of voices and communities, right? And so I ask you not just to think about how people who are obviously spewing hate, how those people operate in their intellectual framework. I think we're clear on that. What I'm asking you is to disrupt when it happens in spaces that are claiming to be safe, in spaces in which it actually doesn't take a long time in the world of the internet for people to find themselves recruited into fascism. It's a very quick process. And so I'm asking us, as we think about creating safety for trans people, we don't divorce it from our racial justice work, right? That we don't divorce it from our disability justice work, that we don't divorce it from our work against capitalism and classism, and that we especially don't divorce it from our understanding of how fascism operates, right? And so I just want to again thank y'all for your time today, for all the things that you all are doing and continue to do to disrupt negativity and violent people. What you all are doing in Florida impacts everyone, right? And so the good work that you all do reverberates. So I cannot say that enough. The good work that you all do in Florida is going to hit what happens in South Carolina, is going to hit what happens in Tennessee, is going to hit what happens in New Jersey and New York, is going to hit what happens here in California, is going to hit what happens in Maine, is going to hit what happens in Oregon. And it's so important and vital for y'all to continue doing that work. Thank y'all for having me out again. You all can find me all over the interwebs, or y'all can hit me up at any time. And I just appreciate being in community with y'all. Thank you.